Help MythVision keep bringing you material by becoming a Patreon member, as well as PayPal. Like, share, subscribe, and comment. Join the Patreon to get early access to videos and check out the website.
Go ahead, get the book. Come on, subscribe to his podcast.
We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. Your host, Derek Lambert. Early Mormon history like you've never seen it before with Bryce Blankenagle. He is the host of Naked Mormonism podcast. Guys, he literally gets naked while doing the podcast. It makes it that much more effective. And you guys just can tell, you can hear through the audio that he's naked. I don't know how that's possible, but it happens.
I'm only actually wearing half a shirt right now. Everything from here down.
Dude, I think that's
all
what
Britney
gives you...
Spears right now.
You're doing the reverse of the magic underwear situation here. So
That's right. That's right.
This is an interesting thing. I'm starting to catch on to your little tactics.
I need a little baker's cap.
David Fitzgerald, one of the greatest, funniest guys I know of, and he's so outgoing. I'm serious, no joking, man. You are the author of The Complete Heretic's Guide to Western Religion and the Mormons. I've been butchering this, man, and I keep saying early Mormonism, and I keep thinking that's the author title of your book. I mean, that's the book. So
That's the book.
can't get it wrong. And you were the forerunner to this, and Bryce took this and went exhaustive into different areas. So if you're interested in knowing when Sally Sue slept with Johnny Bob on a Tuesday night at 9 p.m. and conceived of their twins, you might want to check out the Naked Mormonism podcast. If you're interested in getting a great overview and touching on the history of this cult leader, definitely get the book and check out what David brings to the table, because even Bryce learned from him early on, and he's so entertaining. You guys take boring, complex, I say boring for the typical person, by the way, not people like you, boring ideas, and you make them come to life, and you guys give them energy that they don't typically have if you're reading a historical account or something. And so that I seriously have to bow to you guys and say thank you so much for joining me on this. The last couple shows we did, we talked about Joseph Smith in prison, him in the exodus of his people. The episode prior to that, he's betrayed by one of his own disciples. One of you shall betray me. Jesus talks about the same thing. So I want you guys to just take us off from here. We're about to get into polygamy, and I can't even start. You guys know this is about to get real crazy. We already have people dying, and assassinations and treason and government officials. He's on his way to the president. Okay, I will be silent from here on out. I might interject here and there, but I want to hear what you guys have to say. So thank you so much for joining me. Go in the description and get the stuff.
Do what Derek says, everybody. The thing is, I've read some of the comments as well, the public comments, at least, not the private DMs or anything that you've gotten, Derek, but I've seen a number of people commenting of like, I feel like this is an overview, but you're leaving so much out. Can we please do them longer than an hour? And it's like, if you know YouTube algorithms, you got to keep them a reasonable amount of time. And we're also trying to accelerate through the 40 years of this person's life in a very, very short period of time through this series. And to chart Joseph Smith's progress, as well as the progress and rise of his cult throughout the time period from 1830 to 1844, is you gotta hit just the tops of the mountains. It's really easy to get lost down rabbit trails and in the valleys, and David and I are no strangers to those things. But what I guess what I would like to say is, I'm drawn to Mormon history because it's endlessly fascinating, and it really is. And it whether you're looking at the high level overview, like with David's book, right? Like, I remember when I was reading it, I felt like I was being just ripped through space-time and hanging on by the edge of my fingertips, white knuckling it, because it's so fast-paced, it's so quick. And it's such a comprehensive read of a huge timeline. And you go well beyond the life of Joseph Smith. You go all the way up to the modern church, which is most historians are never capable of viewing anything outside of like their little tiny scope of information. But the more you zoom in, the more details you find, the more interesting it is, the more see the human qualities come out about the various people that we talk about here. And whether it's somebody betraying the prophet, or the prophet himself being stuck in prison and writing his Liberty Jail love letters, or whatever the case may be, there are deep lessons and there are deep human qualities that we can tease out of this timeline. And that's one of the main things that just drives me to learn more about Mormon history every day. It's literally my job. You don't need pants to podcast. So one person that I wanted to introduce last episode we didn't get a chance to introduce is John Cook Bennett.
Dr. Bennett.
Dr. Bennett. Dr. Bennett, Dr. John C. Bennett, is somebody who is, well, let's just say, a divisive and polarizing character in Mormon history. Very, very complicated. Now, he's an opportunist, and he's been, the biographer who wrote the book about John C. Bennett called him Saintly Scoundrel. That's the title of the book. I tend to find Joseph Smith and John C. Bennett absolutely kindred spirits. They are one and the same people.
Totally peas in the pod, right down to the party in their pants.
Yeah,
absolutely.
fair point. So John Bennett, he was also an herbal physician and an obstetrician, and this is obviously going to become relevant as we go further into the Nauvoo timeline here. So in April to May of 1839, Joseph Smith is able to escape jail, and he gets to his Mormon settlement in Quincy, Illinois, which is just right on the banks of the Mississippi. Now, when you consider the logistics of, thousands of people being refugees in a small farming community, it's a bad time for the Mormon population, and nobody has any land to begin putting crops in the ground, which is a huge problem, because if they can't get crops in the ground that spring, then how are they going to get through that upcoming winter? So there's a lot of turmoil, a lot of chaos, and also general lack of resources for people. People don't have any medical care because there are just too many people, and the few doctors that are around are completely overwhelmed with all of the sickness, the dysentery, the starvation, it's a bad time. It's a really, really bad time. So the Mormons are flooding into this settlement known as Quincy, Illinois. Right on the Mississippi, drinking the Mississippi water. There are logistical constraints. A place to sleep, food to eat, and water to drink are really, really strained when you have thousands of people all filling a town who was not expecting them. Yeah. So obviously this is going to get some people interested, and bring a lot of people out of the woodworks. One of the people, obviously, at this time, Illinois was spending at a deficit. It was, the state itself was massively in debt. Illinois, as we know it today, Chicago is a powerhouse of industry and commerce. Chicago at this time was like 2,200 people. It wasn't it wasn't the Windy City yet, right? That's another 30, 40 years down the road. But Illinois itself was in, or as Illinoisans say it, Illinois was at a massive deficit. It was hugely in debt. So the governor at the time, Thomas Carlin, recognized that the Mormons coming here was an opportunity for them to essentially build a Mormon city. And they're already right on the Mississippi. This is the largest commercial river in America at the time. This is before the Columbia became the largest shipping river in America. This is where all of American commerce, especially the gateway to the west, to the western settlements, this is where it was happening, right on the Mississippi. And now you have thousands of people who are plopped down here right on the banks of the Mississippi. They need homes, they need jobs, They need to build a city. They need schools. They need doctors' offices. They need markets. They need churches. They need everything that communities need. This is an opportunity for Thomas Carlin to help bring his state out of debt. So Thomas Carlin ends up showing a lot of favor to the Mormons, which was nice because the last governor said that you can kick him out of, get rid of him, get him out of my state.
Yeah.
But it was also, there's a lot of political machinations going on as well, because Illinois was largely a northern Whig state at the time. The Whig Party was kind of founded as like the big city type of political party, whereas the Democrat Party was the Jacksonian Democrat Party, the states' rights, the slavery, the Southern Democratic Party. So Missouri was a Democrat state. They were the northernmost slaveholding state. Illinois was a Whig state, right? This is the political divide that we would see today between, what, New York and Maine? No, California and Texas, right? Like that's the political divide that we're seeing here. So Carlin is basically showing deference to the Mormons or favoritism to the Mormons in order to get them to settle in his state, which is something that they needed. They needed somebody to extend an olive branch and show good faith in hopes that they could settle and live in peace. But Joseph Smith isn't interested in peace. He's interested in world domination. So that's going to be a bit of an impasse that we're going to come to here, right?
As we'll see.
So I'm going to pull up a picture of John Bennett here. I think I need screen sharing capabilities here. But John C. Bennett was one of these opportunist guys who figured out, hey, all of the Mormons, they're in real bad shape. I need to capitalize on this opportunity. And this is him, right? And this is from the church's owned Joseph Smith Papers Project, where they've digitized huge collections of Joseph Smith's and documents related to Joseph Smith. And all of the documents are sort of
He sort of looked like Napoleon if he had turned vampire.
Exactly. Oh, and he was also he had military training. So he obviously was very appealing to Joseph Smith. He was also a bit of a polymath. He kind of had a diverse and eclectic interests, including herbal remedies and a bit of magic and occultism as well. And, he was also just generally kind of a bastard. He just generally wasn't a great guy. So he was also an opportunist, and he was one of these people who decided, hey, I see the Mormons are destitute. I smell an opportunity. So in 1839, while the Mormons are settling, this guy, John Bennett, actually has a bit of a name for himself in the state of Illinois and in national politics. At this time, he was quartermaster general of the entire state militia, which means that he was Q, right? He handled all the weapons, all of the cannons, he was the logistics guy when it came to all of the state's artillery and guns and everything like that. Which, of course, was really great for Joseph Smith because the Mormons needed guns because Missouri just stolen all their guns, right? So John Bennett sends a letter to Joseph Smith and says, hey, I sympathize with your people and your plight. I would love to, see what is going on and convert to your church. And he does. Bennett goes to Nauvoo. It wasn't Nauvoo at the time. It was Commerce. And he meets with Joseph Smith, and they hit it off. Life was great for these guys. It was awesome.
Like a house on fire. Oh, and it's interesting. His wife did not like John Bennett from the get-go, but they got along awesomely.
Yes. Yeah. And also worth noting, I was actually mistaken. It was 1840, not 1839. That's actually a very important detail. So we're getting a little ahead of ourselves with John Bennett here. But you're right, David. Emma hated John Bennett. She absolutely hated him. And some of the other leadership didn't like him. He was kind of a shifty-eyed guy. Yeah. But him and Joseph
Smith 2.0, honestly.
Yeah, in some ways. In some ways, he was the angel of Joseph's worst demons, right? He was capable of doing what Joseph wanted to do, but brazenly and openly because he wasn't the prophet, right? So that involved all sorts of very seedy and dangerous things. And John Bennett is going to figure heavily into the timeline of Nauvoo history here. So this period, 1839 to 1840, was a very complicated time as the Mormons were settling in Quincy, because this, when Joe got out of prison, the first thing he did was meet with all the Mormons, see their situation, and say, wow, we need answers. And the very next thing he did was go and tour various properties and purchase them. Just, you handed Joseph a piece of paper and said, hey, here's 20,000 acres, here's 500 acres, here's 200 acres, whatever. He'd sign it. He would absolutely sign everything that came across his desk. And never file the paperwork. He signed it. But that opened up thousands of acres for the Mormons to settle on both sides of the Mississippi, right? So we have, on one side is Commerce, Illinois, and on the other side is Montrose, Illinois, or Montrose, Iowa territory, right? So I want to get us a visualization of this with Google Maps here, and we can actually see kind of what this looks like, because the advantages that were available to the Mormons settling here are fantastic. They're profound, right? So this is Nauvoo, but what at this time was Commerce. It was a town with one stone building and a couple of log cabins, and it was a swamp. It was literally a swamp. The Mississippi had, it flooded every spring, flooded the whole area. It was just a huge, huge area, right? So across the river, we have Montrose, and this is the Iowa territory here. But if you look, here is our Mississippi, right? This is the largest shipping river in America at the time. And what Nauvoo is this wonderful little jetty out into the Mississippi. So this provided fantastic opportunities to create the business districts all along the banks of the Mississippi, as well as inns and taverns, hotels for people to stay in. Because when you're going down, north or south on the Mississippi on steamers, you would, sometimes stay overnight in Warsaw or in Keokuk, or if you're going further down, I mean, here's Quincy, where the Mormons began settling. But this all leads you down into St. Louis, and all the way up here into Dubuque and the Wisconsin territory at the time. And this is a huge possibility. And they conceived of all sorts of really cool projects to utilize their position, this jetty out into the Nauvoo, Mississippi, or the Mississippi River, to benefit themselves from the Mississippi. So Joseph Smith and John Bennett started getting real interested in helping out each other here. But once again, I'm getting ahead of myself, unfortunately. So this is the area that the Mormons began settling. This is Commerce. And Joseph Smith bought a ton of land all around here, this whole area. He bought 20,000 acres right here in this little chunk along here, West Point and Donaldson here. This whole area, Joseph Smith purchased a ton of it. And once again, he didn't pay for anything. He just signed his name to all of it. And these land speculators, some of them were charging like 300, 400, 500% higher than the land value, because the Mormons didn't have any other options, right?
And those were the more honest ones. Those were the more honest ones they were dealing with.
Fair point. And we have a few of these people. Isaac Allen is one of them. Somebody named White, I can't remember his first name. There's Horace Hotchkiss. So there are these land speculators that were selling all this land. And this is a kind of a mistake, because Joe was dealing with these guys for the rest of his life. And they were complaining to him that they were paying the taxes on the land that he was settling on, because they had the deed and he wasn't paying it. He was defaulting on all the loans. They were charging him interest when he understood that the agreement was for no interest because of the Mormon situation. But he didn't have the documents to prove it, because he didn't file anything. He just signed anything that came across his desk. It created a massive web of chaos. And that has its own implications and effects and impacts that we'll be discussing here in a little while as well. Anyway, so 1839 rolls along. Joe decides he's got to figure out how to pay for all of this land that he's signing. It wasn't, he wasn't completely reckless at this point. Like he knew that the money was going to come due. And
Um,
You broke out. You broke out, brother. Say that again.
who, me or Bryce?
You.
Oh, I said he'll pay it someday, but that's future Joe's problem.
yeah, that's right. So he went to the government with open hands, asking for money. So while his people were starving and sick, he realized that there were basically a couple of paths to success here. One would be to get a boon of new members and get all their tithing money. That was always on the table. That was always an option. That was always something that he was interested in doing. But the Mormons have made a name for themselves in America. They had to tap into a new market. A second option would be to give a government bailout. Missouri had billed the Mormons for the Missouri Mormon War, right? Like they were massively in debt in the state of Missouri because of what Joseph Smith had done there. Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon, I should say. But the Mormons didn't want to pay that money because they felt that they were slighted, that they were wronged by the state for the state kicking them out. And nobody really looks good in this situation. Everybody's kind of wrong about everything. So Joe decides to first send out all of his apostles on a mission to Europe. And a couple of apostles had gone to Europe a couple years prior with no success, almost no success. They introduced themselves to a few people over there. A couple of people converted, but there was no massive missionary effort. That was in 1837. Now in 1839, Joe decides to, in earnest, try to convert Europeans. So he tells President Brigham Young, he is president of the Quorum of Apostles, because the guy who was Thomas B. Marsh betrayed Joseph Smith. He went and filed the affidavits, told all about the Battle of Crooked River, and it was because of him partially that Joe was in prison, right? So he given Joe the Judas's kiss. So Brigham Young had now ascended to president of the Quorum of Apostles, and they were still down another apostle that he ended up calling his cousin Willard Richards to fill that position. I see that, David, you know that name, Willard Richards.
Yeah, and I keep biting my tongue because it's like, oh yeah, and another thing, but yeah.
I feel like I'm kind of rambling as well and trying to advance it, but no, please chime in, please do.
Well, so for instance, now that we're in Europe, the second go around, Europe at this time is going through the Industrial Revolution, and so there's all these people especially in the small towns, who have lost their traditional way of life and are just being displaced to the factory or nothing. And the Mormons could not have come at a better time, because they were like, well, we'd rather be slaves in America than starve here. And this is even before this is like 10 years before the Irish potato famine. And yet in places like England and Scotland, it's a mess right now. And
that's a good point. The American dream.
Yeah, exactly. And they really ran with it.
Let me ask you guys this, because this is, he goes to Europe to convert Europeans. Well, yeah, he has his disciples or people who are followers to go do this. I don't know how much details in that session of this history, but how successful were they? I mean, you obviously said, David, that they were interested in something different than just the factory.
And not necessarily they're convinced by the theological arguments, but the economic arguments made great sense for them. So one kind of drives the other.
Well, and this is also where Brigham Young becomes incredibly useful, right? Because he was somebody who could, find all of the red lines on a ledger and turn them black, right? Like this guy was a bean counter, and he was extremely critical and hyper focused on management and logistics and making sure all of the gears are greased. And when he gets to Europe, he basically charters a ship and establishes a program where every person who wants to immigrate to America has to just pay his immigration fund £4, 4 British pounds at the time, which that was a lot of money, but that was, that was a week or 2 weeks of wages, right? Like that was reasonable.
Yeah.
And that would get them from Liverpool to New Orleans, or from Liverpool to New York. That would get them from Europe to America. And then they could, take a steamer from New Orleans up the Mississippi right to Nauvoo, or they could, hop on through the Great Lakes and come down.
Back up a sentence. They could steamer up the Mississippi.
Yeah, they could take a steamer up the Mississippi, up straight to Nauvoo, or they could hop on a steamer in Buffalo, or go through the Erie Canal or whatever, or go by foot. Or it was a program set up to get a lot of people a long distance in a short amount of time, and it was incredibly successful. This also endeared the European Mormons to Brigham Young. It made them, he was the public face of the church. It wasn't Joseph Smith. These people didn't know who Joseph Smith was, right? Joseph Smith remained in America. These people converted because of the sermons of Brigham Young and Heber Kimball. And these guys became the authority of the church in Europe. And they were sending thousands of people. By the time 1844 rolls around, which is the death of Joseph Smith, I believe somewhere in the ballpark of 6,000 to 8,000 people had migrated from Europe to Nauvoo in the surrounding areas. I mean, just a huge windfall of people coming in. But David, as you said, these people are coming over for the American dream. They're not wealthy.
Nope.
Right? You're adding destitute people to a population of already destitute people. You're just compounding problems here.
And as you point out earlier, they're living on a swamp. And when you live in a swamp in the 19th century, you have malaria. And therefore, a doctor like John Bennett was very needed at the time to help with the malarial victims. It's one of the things he really contributed. And the evil Dave Brain just can't help but point out that while all these missionaries are in Europe, meanwhile, back at home, Joseph Smith is caring for the widows of the church whose husbands are away. And he gained any number of celestial wives during this time while he was sending their husbands off on missions across the ocean.
Hold on. This is what I've been waiting 9-10 episodes for, this good stuff. Look, okay, hold on. This is great. I have to ask real quick before we get to the fun stuff, because I can't wait to hear this. I love this is just so funny. It's like Muhammad, like when you hear about Muhammad and he sees his cousin or nephew's wife and he's like, I just had a revelation. He saw her nude, you know what I'm saying? It's like, God just told me, and it's like, sure, buddy, your erection told you. But anyway,
wait till we get into Doctrines and Covenants, when they're like messages from God that read just like King James Version fanfic are naming people by name. It's just so hilarious, the way they're written out.
I got to ask a detail though about the sermons that are being given in Europe. And I know that there's probably an episode you could do on this and like talking about how the sermons went down. When I went to church, everybody who's like a regular Christian knows how sermons go. It's about Jesus Christ. It's all about Jesus Christ. How does one who's a prophet, who's a president of the prophet, out here in Europe saying sermons, how would a sermon like that go? In what way does Joseph Smith get incorporated? Or is it just like a Jesus sermon, except once in a while they hint at, oh, there is another prophet, and its name's Joseph Smith? I mean, is it mainly a Christ-centric, Jesus Christ-centric type sermon, and they just incorporated Joseph Smith in some way? Or is it very Joseph Smith-centric?
It's an awesome question, Derek, because one thing, what we think of as Mormonism hadn't quite gelled yet. This is the time when this is all coming together. So I'm really curious to see what Bryce has to say about how they're answering that question. What were they preaching these early years before it became widely known about this, that, or the other doctrine?
It was quite varied, depending on the audience. They were allowed to preach
Start back. It was quite varied. Sorry.
It was quite varied, dependent on the audience, of course. Most of the places they were allowed to preach were other churches, right? Right, like they would forge relationships with leaders of other faith traditions, and they would say, you know, can we borrow your church for, you know, Sunday afternoon? And this was pretty common, right? There were oftentimes community churches where the community would come together, build a church, and then different faiths, you know, Episcopals and then the Presbyterians and then the Lutherans, they would all use the church on like different hour blocks on Sundays or different days of the week or whatever the case may be. So the Mormons were able to utilize those churches as well as other churches that were built all around the places that they were proselytizing. It was mostly in Britain. But a little bit in Scotland, a little in Ireland as well. So they were able to utilize those other churches, and most of the time expounding on the Bible. Now,
Sorry, they were utilizing other churches, and you broke out.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. So they were utilizing these other churches, and oftentimes their sermons were just expounding on the Bible. Now, this is a lesser known document or a set of documents for in Mormon history, but these are called the Lectures on Faith. And the Lectures on Faith are basically a breakdown of 7 different lectures on Mormon theology. And they were included with Joseph Smith's Revelations, which became the book that we know in Mormon canon as the Doctrine and Covenants, right? So the doctrine is the Lectures on Faith. The covenants are Joseph Smith's Revelations as mouthpiece of God, the Doctrine and Covenants. Well, in 1921, they removed the Lectures on Faith. So Doctrine and Covenants is just covenants now, but it's still called Doctrine and Covenants. But those Lectures on Faith, they provided basically a lecture along with a Q&A portion about what the lecture concerns. And it's pretty basic Christianity, Trinitarian Christianity. These were conceived in 1831, 1832, long before Joseph came up with the multiple versions of heaven and the Zion is in Missouri. And,
even the story of him getting his message and the golden plates and all, you know, that wasn't happening either. In fact, it makes me wonder how many of these English converts really felt baited and switched when they came to America and say, wait, what? You believe what? What do we believe now? And
that did happen. That did happen. But there were also some of them who got there and they were, you know, they showed fealty to the prophet. You know, William Clayton is an example of this, who showed fealty to the prophet, and their loyalty was rewarded. And, you know, in William Clayton's journal, William Clayton's journal, which the church have leaked passages.
William Clayton's journal.
William Clayton's journal that the church has suppressed from it. He talks about having a menage a trois with his mother-in-law and wife and sister, right? Like it's
are you listening? This story is the next Game of Thrones.
So it's Game of Stones, man. I want it so bad. But the thing is like when they got to Nauvoo, a lot of these immigrants realized that they were sold a false bill of sale, but they didn't have much other options, right? This is the land of opportunity, but Nauvoo was still pretty far away from a lot of other cities. And these are Europeans who are largely more progressive than the Western Americans at this time. They could move elsewhere in Illinois, but there wasn't a city that they were familiar with that was industrial like they had become familiar with from what they moved away from to get to America. Right. They could try and expand into the West, but that be native territory. They'll kill you. They could try and go to the South in Missouri or something, but that's also slave territory. And Europeans from the 1830s or 1840s and slaveholding Missourians, they don't have a whole lot in common.
It's true. And in a lot of ways, they are at the edge of the world. This is like, we forget. I'm living in California where I am. Used to be the border between Spain and Russia, just not barely 150 years ago. Just barely over that. This country, half of this country is wilderness, happening wilderness.
Yeah, and this is like America existed in kind of like pockets, right? There was like there was a whole East Coast that was the original colonies that were slowly creeping west to the Mississippi, and the Mississippi in the 1840s was the breakoff. Everything west was from that was the West. There were territories in all of this, but then there was also Texas and the Oregon Territory in the West Coast, and California was also being settled. Didn't achieve statehood until 49, is it 1849? I think.
Right after they discovered gold. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes.
that's so convenient that they discovered gold in California, which made it such a huge economic boom for Salt Lake City, which was a stopping point on the journey to California. So convenient. So convenient that they discovered gold in Mormon territory. So anyway, this is all building, multiple threads together, right? So Joseph is getting in these new converts. They're coming into Nauvoo. Joseph also goes to Washington D.C. to ask for a government bailout. I see you calling for a timeout.
I just want, every time I hear the word Nauvoo, I have to say where that name came from. It's because Joseph Smith declared, this place will be a beautiful plantation, and we will call it Nauvoo, which in Hebrew means plantation. Except it doesn't. There is no Hebrew word Nauvoo. There's a slightly underused poetic word that's Nava or Nave, but but he thought it was Nauvoo, and it just never fails to delight me that whole thing is named after a misunderstanding from Joseph Smith, like so much of Mormonism.
Zelph was a Native American white Lamanite. And Adam-on-Diamond was the place that Adam and Eve settled after they were kicked out of Jackson County, Missouri. Right?
Which was, as we all know, is the Garden of Eden. Yes, exactly. And the site of the second coming of Jesus. It's like, boom, right on the corner of a Walnut Street and 3rd or whatever it is in there. That's where Jesus is touching down.
Thank God for modern day prophets.
Yeah. And in the meantime, the church would love to own that property, but one of the split off versions of Mormonism owns that property. But anyway, we're getting way ahead of ourselves now.
Yeah. The Hedrikites, right? They go by the name the Church of Christ because according to the early church and the Book of Mormon, the Church of Christ is supposed to be called the Church of Christ. And they say that Joseph apostatized by changing the name. Anyway, whatever, it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
anyway.
It's like, well, it's just irony upon irony. They dogpile up so fast, it's hard to keep
amazing. It's truly amazing.
That's a great question to ask, though, Bryce. Is their prophet apostatized? What do they preach now? How does their myth work at this point? Anyway, I don't want to get caught up in that. I'm just saying that's like something to put on the shelf and think about. Like, how can you have a Mormon type of?
Tell me about God's perfect plans. Exactly.
Yeah. But so you were talking
this
about
conversation. Tell me about Mormon history. Exactly.
I know we're definitely doing that. So you were back. I want to get back to the hot stuff. So these guys are overseas trying to get guys to come back, and he says, "I'll take care of your wives." There's a lot of sickness going on. The doctor's probably fondling with these women who need help. If you know what I mean. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there.
And speaking of doctors and women who need help, one other thing that he provides medical service is abortions. We're getting way of our health.
Yeah, we're ahead of ourselves.
Way of our head.
So to go back and answer a question from much earlier, what the Mormons preached there in Britain is largely the Bible. Some of it was on Joseph Smith's history, because like you said, David, like the Mormonism we know today, it was only beginning to morph and change into what it is today at this time. Like they were still conceiving of the mythical journey of Joseph Smith at this time. So there's that. They're preaching on the Book of Mormon and showing passages in the Bible that talk about the stick of Judah and the stick of Joseph, and the stick of Joseph is the Book of Mormon. They're conceiving all of these things that missionaries preach of warning.
They were conceiving of all these.
They were conceiving of all of these missionary tracts and programs and ideas and concepts. They were writing missionary tracts like a voice of warning. They were creating the missionary program essentially by trial and error.
Yeah, it's almost like the railroad train is going and they're laying the tracks as the railroad is moving.
It's very cartoonish. Yes, exactly. Yeah, so it's a complicated time for them because they have no oversight by Joseph Smith, and he can't be bothered to pay them much mind. Um, because he's so busy with everything else. He's trying to coordinate the settlement of thousands of people to a whole new area while draining a swamp and while settling a farmlands outside of the city and trying to get all sorts of public works projects off the ground. Right. So Joseph Smith has 10 plates up in the air and he's trying to figure out how to keep them all spinning. And at this time, he's like, we need money. I got a plan. I need money. And that's part of the impetus behind him sending all the apostles out to be missionaries. And also he collected a bunch of affidavits from Mormons who suffered the troubles in Missouri, including himself and his older brother Hiram, about what happened to them, which he, with a few other people, went and presented to Congress, in hopes that they could achieve some form of a bailout, some economic relief for this. And they were laughed out of the chambers. Joseph Smith went and met with President Martin Van Buren himself. According to Joseph Smith, Martin Van Buren said, I can do nothing for you, or else the whole state of Missouri will be, which, it's politics.
Yeah, exactly. It could
Yeah.
be. Yeah.
But Joseph Smith being rejected that government bailout, a lot of people point to that time in his life, like, coming down the stairs where Joseph says, I'm going to run for president. And I think that they're right. I think he met with the president and realized that this guy is an oaf. He called him a fop or a fool. He said that he is wholly without parts because he's like a very ugly and bulbous type of large man. Like Joseph, when he came back from his meeting with President Van Buren, like he hated this guy, absolutely hated Van Buren. And with reason, like he wasn't a great president to begin with. But also when you're going and asking people for $1.2 million in 1840 money, that's like they tell you
1.2 million. Sorry.
So when you go and ask somebody for like $1.2 million in 1840 money, which is like 40 million today, and they tell you to take a hike, you feel a little burned by that, right?
A little bit.
I gave you my heart. You crushed it.
Yeah.
So, he's burned. And that's when Joe decides he's going to run for president when he can. And he eventually does. But we can't get ahead of ourselves now, can we?
No.
Man.
So in the midst of all of this, right, there's a lot of bad stuff going on. This is all 1839. And eventually Joseph begins taking more wives in all of this, right? I don't know. I'm trying to decide how to do polygamy, how to deal with this issue, because it's a big enough issue standalone to discuss.
I almost think we should go with that route but then again, so much of his later problems and it all falling apart. Business.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm not getting you guys and maybe you're hearing each other. My internet must not be stable like it should be.
Probably isn't, because I'm losing you too every now and again. And
yeah.
Okay, and I'm sorry, man. I don't know if it's the kids inside because my kids go to school and stuff, but how to deal with polygamy. Go ahead and restate whatever you said there, David, because I like every time you interject, you've got to say something, because if not, Bryce and me are the only ones saying shit sometimes. I'm like, we got to hear David. Please say what you said.
Okay, yeah, it's almost worth saving polygamy for its own show because there's so much going on with just that. And let's face it, it's super juicy. But at the same time, so much of what caused Mormonism and Joseph Smith's life to fall apart were directly tied to the problems that were brought up by polygamy. So it's a tough balancing act, like every single episode of this show is. How much do we tell? How much do we not tell?
Maybe I can ask you a question here, Bryce, to try and make this simple. And then I'll ask to say this to our audience. Do you want a show on polygamy? Okay, just how bad do you want one? Because if you want one bad enough, these gentlemen will definitely do one. But I want to ask a simple question because we can't spend too much time on that. You're going to constantly refer back to, and another wife, and another wife. And there's going to be this huge mystery of like, what, how, why? The doctrine of polygamy what is your, as investigating, I know the church might have an explanation, okay, and they might try to go back to the divine. What is the human, what is the natural, what is the non-divine explanation you would come up with? The guy was horny and he was attracted to girls, on top of his being a prophet and a man of God and really thinking himself to be this thing that deserves more. So he ends up, you know, taking these other women. What's your explanation for it? And we'll move on. If you want a show on polygamy, I'm about to say polytheism, because that's part of this stuff too. You know, let us know, and Bryce and Dave can consider it. So
thoughts, David? I gotta piece my thoughts together a little bit more
to it, but just saying that he was a horny dude who really believed his own press relief, I think is as good as answer as we're going to get without completely going all psychological on it. And again, it wasn't just Joseph Smith doing this. Dr. Bennett was another case of somebody who was, you know, chasing all the skirts in Nauvoo. And it's also complicated by the fact that it started as this very secret thing that nobody knew about, became rumors, became denied publicly in Mormon speeches and in Mormon articles. And then it turns out, oh, wait, oh, yes, it's always been around and God told us to do it. And he commands it as an eternal commandment that we have to do it, you know?
Yeah. Cover up is worse than the crime.
And if we don't, we can't go into heaven until Mormon Utah statehood comes up, in which case there's a whole nother flip all around. And the eternal covenant becomes, well, it's a spiritually eternal thing. So, you know, the old song and dance of, well, this is what God says. Well, he didn't mean it that way, you know.
So people who know Mormon history get everything that you said there. I feel like there might be some of the nuances lost in all of that, but yeah. Utah was declared a polygamous territory, and the federal government withheld granting Utah its statehood until polygamy was outlawed by the Utah Constitution itself. And that only came after the federal government seized the property of the church and shut down the immigration fund, and it was a nasty and ugly time.
Can I give 30 seconds? 30-second idea on this. There was, like we said, the guy's attracted to girls. He's kind of into women. I mean, most guys might fall into this kind of trap of cheating. The guy likes girls, but on top of that, it does have these strange, what if Joseph Smith's seeing himself like Abraham? Like, he has to repopulate this new cult, we're the real chosen race of people. And therefore he has this kind of blend of his drive, his sex drive, plus his cult leadership mentality of, I'm like the chosen one of God. And maybe I feel this way because this is what needs to happen. And this is God steering me in this direction. I don't know, but
I think so, because this is typical cult leader 101. You see this kind of harem mentality develop even today, even in cults today. So yeah, it doesn't really shock me that that's what he was doing. It's interesting to see how it plays out, how they're very coy about it, and then they're openly deny it, and just the levels of the Orwellian rewrites of their history about it. You know, it's fascinating to me.
Well, and there are so many different components of it to break down. And without doing a proper treatment of it, and like there's no such thing as like a complete treatise on it doesn't exist, right? I mean, there are entire volumes of books dedicated to the topic, and just the historicity of it, not even on the theology of it or, you know, the morality of it. There are plenty of books on that as well. So there's no such thing as like doing completely polygamy from top to bottom and getting it, you know, just doing it as a standalone episode or whatever, because there are always different angles and components to consider.
What if we do one just talking about the different women and some of the stuff that happened?
That said, if we just do a gossip show about, and then this happened, and then this happened, and Signe Rigdon's daughter, and this,
those are absolutely fun. I get that. There are also many ways to look at those, right? Like those were public scandals, but in private, they were, you know, they were poly couples fighting, and that's not like that's dirty laundry, and that's kind of ugly, right?
No,
But also there's the Mormon apologetic angle that this has to come from God.
Mhm.
And therefore, Joseph explicitly used the names of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, the polygamous prophets in the Bible, to justify his actions. And I think, kind of like you both were saying, that this guy is the type of mentality and the type of personality that, if he has an idea and he has feelings about that idea that are good, then that idea came from God. Right.
There you
And
go.
that means that anything that he thinks of that he wants to do comes from God in his mind. And that he unfortunately needs to turn to some solely mechanisms in order to achieve those goals, in order to achieve what he
Mm.
believes is commanded of by God. Um, it's a complicated matter.
It is complicated, and it's also complicated by the fact that those who are making the argument that no, this is biblically mandated, they actually have the Bible verses to back it up. The people who are saying no, one man, one woman, there's not a lot of that going on in the Bible.
No.
Yeah.
Sorry for that side trail. We have to project ourselves back on track, and we have 10 minutes. So, where are we at, Bryce?
What I will say about polygamy here is, David, you said it perfectly. Like, episode, I think that would be fun and probably helpful to try and examine different angles of it, but the consequences of it going on are deep, and they span the entirety of Nauvoo history, and the decisions that were made based on polygamy happening, on allowing polygamy to flourish, on trying to keep the things, keep it as only rumors, and trying not to let anybody actually squeal about it, creating more exclusive and tighter knit groups of people who are allowed to participate in this, or even be allowed to be taught the knowledge, the information that it exists, right? Like, these are all decisions that were made within the context of creating harems for the leadership of the church. And like, we have to recognize that those have some serious impacts.
For sure. And that's worth pointing out too, that it's not Joe average rank and file Mormon who are doing this.
No.
It's from the top. It's very 1984. There's the inner party and the outer party.
It's literally the anointed circle, right? Like the calling and the called and elected, those who are endowed, right? Like these all of these concepts, all of these ideas, they evolve, and the people who are allowed to participate in it, the circle becomes tighter and tighter when you realize that somebody is betrayed, somebody squealed, somebody told somebody who they weren't supposed to, right? And this also spurned the creation of the currently longest running female run organization in America, the Relief Society. And that's also ahead of us, because that's in 1842. We're still not through 1839 to 40 right now. But the Relief Society was created within the context of controlling and systematizing polygamy. So all that said, maybe we should do it as a standalone episode. These, because going to inform the
Do
rest.
it as a
of Nauvoo.
standalone episode. It's bad. Sorry.
Okay. We may have to do that standalone episode. We may have to do it in between some of these Nauvoo episodes, because the content of that is going to span the rest of Nauvoo history, and it's going to contextualize a lot of what happens in Nauvoo. So maybe we'll discuss that off air. But needless to say, the beginnings were there, and Joseph Smith had told his boys back in 1833, right? Like 7 years before all this is going on, that you go and take the natives in order to breed a more righteous, white, and delightsome race, right? Like, you go take those wives as your plural wives, because it's on us to multiply and replenish the earth with white and delightsome Mormons. The foundations were there. We know that there was the Fanny Alger scandal that we dealt with that was swept under the rug, but came back and got Joe kicked out of his own church, basically, or one of the factors that got him kicked out of his own church. And now when he was in Missouri, he was sealed, or he had a marriage to Lucinda Pendleton Morgan Harris, who was a celebrity of anti-Masonic fame. So we know that there are people who are participating in this, people who know that this is going on. And here we see the very first inklings of Joseph Smith taking multiple wives and actually conducting a marriage ceremony instead of just sleeping with the girl whose house in which he lives, right? And that sets out some of the blueprints and the foundations for polygamy as well, to be codified into its own special type of ceremony, its own special thing, its own special decrees and rituals and things that have to happen in order to allow polygamy to work in a family. So we see, once again, just like with everything else in Joseph Smith's timeline, we see the evolution of an idea. He comes up with an idea, says this is great, and then he adapts it, he evolves it, he builds on it, or he cuts away the fat or whatever to make it a viable idea. And whatever the nugget of that viable idea is, the church today largely practices those in a most systematized and efficient format.
Yeah. And pretends it was like that from the very beginning.
Right. Yeah. Right. The church was restored. It wasn't evolved.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Spiritual wives from the beginning. They were always just spiritual. Yeah. Okay.
Well, and let's talk about that too, because in the foundations of Mormon theology, and we'll have to do a theology episode itself, it requires polygamy. You have to have polygamy for Mormon theology to work.
Yeah. I love the way they come on strong. No, this is a commandment of God, an eternal commandment and required. And then politics gets in the way, they get pushed back, and it's like, oh, reinterpret.
Yeah. Oh, we'll put it on hold for a season. It's all right. Everything happens in God's time, not ours.
Exactly. Do you remember when Harold Camping was predicting the end of the world, either 2011, 2013, around that time? And same thing. He builds up this huge $1 million radio empire and says, the end of the world's coming this day. And then, boop,
nothing.
Day comes and gone. It's like, whoa.
Yeah. And see, Joe was smarter than him, because Joe said, if I live to be 85, I'll see the end of the world. That was brilliant. This was brilliant. That was like 15 years beyond the average life expectancy for men at the time. If he lives to be 85, he was not making.
And that's pure Apostle Paul playbook. It's like, oh no, there's no time. It's happening. Jesus is coming any minute now. Any minute.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's tie it together here with a couple threads to round out this episode, right? So we have the government denied the Mormons bailout. We have the missionaries in Europe preaching, converting, and sending thousands of people over to Nauvoo. It starts slowly, but it ramps up very quickly. And by 1844, it's like 6,000 to 8,000 people, and it expands Nauvoo crazily, right? We have this town, Commerce, which is a swampland with a few buildings on it that they're eventually going to call Nauvoo the Beautiful, because it's a Hebrew word that Joe made up.
The word that Joe made up, exactly.
And we have a guy who just sent a letter to Joseph Smith saying that I'm interested in your people. I want to be converted. And that's John C. Bennett. And we'll pick up on the thread of John C. Bennett a lot more, because when we discuss the foundations of the city of Commerce becoming Nauvoo and how all of this played into, the rest of Nauvoo, it is so fascinating. It is so fascinating because John Bennett was absolutely not the hero that Joe deserved. He was absolutely the hero that Joe needed at the time. And this guy was so damn well connected. It's insane how well connected this guy was and what he was able to accomplish on behalf of Joseph Smith while he was sharing the limelight with the prophet as basically a co-president of the church for a very brief time.
A brief but glorious time that ended very badly.
Oh God, it's so good. It's so good.
Wow. Okay, gentlemen, fork in it till next episode. Holy crap. You guys, tell us what you think about this episode. I'm really interested in seeing what you guys have to say about this. For sure,
Yeah.
go down in the description. I
This-
need you guys to.
This
go
episode
ahead.
was a bit of a slog, but this was drawing the blueprints. We get into building tomorrow next time. This I understand this was a bit of a slow, meandering episode. I'm sorry, but this is all foundational knowledge for Nauvoo, and Nauvoo is my favorite period of Mormon history. It's so bonkers. I'm so excited for this.
All part of our eternal plan for this series. That's right.
Eternal series, you mean?
Yeah, this could go on forever, but we'll have to end it at some point. And if you guys are interested, go down in the description, help out both of these guys. They have Patreons. You guys can become Patreon members, get exclusive access to some of their stuff. I know David is going to look at what he's going to end up doing for his patrons that are going to join, but help him grow it off the ground. And you guys go help Bryce out too. You know, we at MythVision have it as well. Go in the description. There's plenty of ways you can help all of us. And if you're able to, let's just say you had a lot of connections, like some of the guys that Joseph Smith had, you might can help us out in some way, shape, or form to make this thing grow. Make sure you guys like this video, and don't forget, we are MythVision.